For those of you who may not have noticed, a number of world leaders, including our president, have been promoting environmental and green political theory with a lot of enthusiasm in public speeches in the last few years. And why shouldn't they? They're representative of the turn of tide of power away from the freedom of capitalism and a return to the tyranny of the elite over the individual. And the motivating force behind the move away from capitalism and toward green politics? Power, and the control of resources once again by government. In short, a restoration of the forces of feudalism. Excuse me? What? Feudalism? How does that relate to global warming and the green movement? In the bad old days of the Middle Ages, government was, in most parts, run by a concept described by historians as feudalism. Although some historians simply describe feudalism as despotic rule and tyranny, feudalism is a term used when the elite or nobility have control over lower classes and their resources through voluntary or deeded titular titles and landholdings. The nobility in those cases kept tight control over the kingdom's resources. Shooting a king's deer or mining or drilling for water on king's land meant severe repercussions for those doing so without permission from the king. Permission was defined as a title, and for that title a certain tax or levy was assessed yearly by the king. Thus, control of those resources allowed the king to maintain power through the use of those tax funds to amass armies and defend their noble rights, some of which were quite onerous. It also made it difficult for the masses to amount to much during a civil insurrection, since they could not raise capital to amass weapons without significant resource holdings. Under this system, nobles had sway over large portions of the world for many generations. It wasn't until the rise of mechanization and the ability of the masses to gather wealth and the eventual expansion of the New World that this system finally lost its grip over mankind. Keep in mind that this was fairly recent from a historical point of view, only about 350 years. The control of the kingdom's resources goes back to the Roman Empire and the concept of classes and nobility even further. Now look at the green movement and what does it want to accomplish? Well, first off, it wants the people of the world to stop using up resources and issue harsh penalties to those who don't comply. It wants to control that distribution of resources to those who control their respective governments and to essentially centrally control the distribution of said resources, in other words, wealth, to the citizens they see fit to. This is better known as cap and trade. The wealthy or nobles will be able to buy carbon credits to use as much resources as they want, while the poorer people will have to limit their consumption. Sound familiar? One of the big shakers and movers in this movement is, guess who? The Royal House of England and Prince Charles. Charles has been huge on the environmental movement for some time and heavily involved in green efforts worldwide. It would benefit the royal houses greatly for a return to centralized resource control and thus centralized power in the hands of the few. Most of the other royal houses of Europe are also similarly aligned with Charles on this matter. Keep in mind that it doesn't take all these leaders to actively conspire together to restore power. It's just that they act in a similar fashion to achieve a common goal, power and wealth in the hands of the few with control over the hands of the many. The big culprit enemy in this pro-green movement is, of course, the United States, who for years has amassed power and wealth in its free citizenry by thumbing its nose at the nobility and killing as many of the king's deer as they could, and establishing the first true free republic in human history under the banner of capitalism. I'm sure more than a few blue bloods are a wee upset at this, and that 1,500 years of power and rule came to a screeching stop with the advent of the American Revolution. And now we have a president who supports the green theory hook, line, and sinker. The president believes, like most of Europe and some of Asia, that America is somehow evil for making the most of her vast natural resources, profiting from it, and limiting the power of its own government. Shameful, aren't we? Shameful that America produces 90% of the world's wealth, and America remains by far the #1 manufacturing country in the world. It outproduces #2 China by more than 40%. U.S. manufacturers cranked out nearly $1.7 trillion in goods in 2009, according to the United Nations, without so much as a good whipping or a month in the dungeon to build character. The great story of America essentially boils down to this. We've managed to make more goods with fewer workers and have a higher standard of living in the world while doing it. That's what these geniuses will send us back to if they have their way, though, exploding our debt while increasing our energy costs and limiting personal wealth. And by limiting personal freedoms, they will certainly go a long way to keeping the American people in line, won't they? Bah, down with the kings. Long live American capitalism and the freedom it brings.